Okay, so this is the fifth lecture on the chapter of socialization, and we'll see if we can't cover more than one slide in this lecture, huh? The last lecture, I was talking about socialization of emotion. In this one, I want to pick up and go on to the topic of agents of socialization. So what's important to understand about this slide is what is meant by an agent. An agent is like, just like if you're talking about a cleaning agent, it's the chemical that does the cleaning, or an FBI agent, it's the one that carries out the work of the FBI, or your or your insurance agent, it's the one who sells your insurance. So agents of socialization are the groups or individuals that do the socializing. And this is just a list of different agents, different groups, different groups, but it is not intended to be a complete exhaustive list. I mean, pretty much anything that has to do with people can act as an agent of socialization. There's a couple important things, though, I want to point out on this slide, and I have an illustration to help you remember some of them. The first thing to point out is the primary agent. So the group of people who have the most significant and the most long-term implication or on your sense of who you are, your place in the world, and that's your family or whatever group you live with, right? So sometimes you live with your family of origin, sometimes it's it's an adoptive family, but whatever that group is that raises you through your childhood, right? That's considered your primary agent, your family or your home. I try to remember agent of socialization by using this concentric circle model, which is a circle inside a circle, right? So you think about your family group, and some of the things that influence how your family socializes you, or what is important, is their occupation, their social class, specifically like families that are employed in occupations where you're paid by the hour, where you clock in and clock out. They will pass on, remember this is about social reproduction, right? They're going to pass on the values that were important for them or what enabled them to be successful. So when you're paid by the hour, you being on time is important, right? So you'll teach punctuality. If, on the other hand, your punctuality is not something that's important for you as the parent, right? Then you're probably less likely. If you're rewarded for being creative, then you're going to reward your children for being creative too, right? If you grow up in a home where maybe the adults are in the military, and that hierarchy or respect for authority is really important to them, that's going to be what you pass on to your children. That's what we mean by social reproduction, right? So I grew up in a home where both my parents were teachers, and what we did for work and for play was school. Well, here I sit, right? They passed that to me. That's all I know. This is pretty much the only kind of occupation I know. What we do for fun, when I grew up, we went to museums. What do we do for fun now? We go to museums. My daughter is studying history and museum studies, right? You pass it on. Also true that the discipline or the way that we discipline our children. If we grew up in a home that's actually social class is influenced the way that we discipline. There is a correlation, right? There's a correlation that privileged and wealthier households are less likely to use physical or corporal punishment. Less economically privileged households are more likely to use physical or corporal punishment. The example that I often use is if you're wealthy and your kid's planning to take a spring break trip to Mexico and they screw up at school, you can take their spring break trip away. If you don't have a spring break trip to take, if you don't have a car to take away, then what do you got left? How do you discipline your kids, right? If you don't have the things. So you might use physical force, or you might withdraw affection. Okay, going back to my little analysis here, my concentric circle. Imagine you're in your family unit, right? You step outside your home. Where are you? Well, you're in your neighborhood. Now think about what's in your neighborhood. What does your neighborhood tell you about your place? What does it tell you about what's important? Well, in my neighborhood, I live in an old ward district. I have lots of different kinds of people. I have old people and students, and I have a sidewalk that runs in front of my house. I see lots of people walking dogs, lots of comings and goings, right? Would be a different sense as to who you are than if I walked outside my house and I lived in the middle of a pasture, right? Or I had no neighbors for a mile, or I lived in rural, where there's different, the people in your neighborhood um, are communicating messages about who you are and how we're supposed to be and what's important. I have a woman across the street. I've talked about her before, right? The pagan woman across the street. When my daughter was growing up, and I had lots of students, and they'd leave beer cans in my yard. My daughter thought all college kids got drunk, right? Because that's what she saw in her neighborhood. All right. Once upon a time, every neighborhood had a school. Schools were actually established in neighborhoods intentionally to serve as community centers. They were places before community centers. They were often on the city, what are they called? They were called the city squares or community squares, and they were places where people intentionally congregated, right? Well, then, so what did you learn in your schools? Well, sociologically, a couple important concepts to talk about is what's meant by manifest function and latent function of schools, right? Manifest, if I was standing in front of you, a manifest, right? Big. Manifest is what's obvious that you're supposed to be getting at school. Well, you're obviously supposed to be learning, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? Obviously. But I bet you learned a lot of latent or skinny things. I bet you learned more about that was not a part of the curriculum than was a part of the curriculum. What did you learn in school about punctuality, having the right stuff, right? Being marginalized, being bullied. What did you learn about boys and girls, popular kids, not popular kids? What did you learn about all of that other stuff, right? One of the things that sociologists who study education, and you can actually get like a degree, you can like emphasize sociology of education. They talk about how education is it's a social reproduction agent. We have been doing American education the same way since its inception. The teacher stands at the symbolic front of the room and they talk to their students. They tell them how to do it, right? The students go out and they do their homework and they bring it back. There's nothing really radical being proposed in American education. We are expected to be on time. Punctuality is continually reinforced. Respect for authority. There's not a whole lot of radical stuff happening in American education. It is an agent of social reproduction. Okay, I digress. So you have school in your neighborhood. Well, then there's another agent, and it's actually not on the slide here, that it actually tells schools what schools can do. It tells neighborhoods how neighborhoods are supposed to be, and it tells families how families are supposed to organize themselves. And that is, if you can see it, that is the government. The government influences what schools can teach, how long they're supposed to be in session, how many students can be in a classroom. The government can tell my neighbors what kind of furniture they can have on the front porch, how many people can live in the houses, that they have to paint their houses, right? The government tells your family. The government can actually tell family units how they can and can't discipline their kids, right? That you can't use too much force, right? There are rules, and there are rules, according to the government, about what kind of things parents must do for their children and what kind of things they should not do for their children. And in this way, when you turn on the news and the talking heads are saying, America this or America that, or this is what it means to be a good American, or these are bad Americans, they are agents of socialization. They are telling us what we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to act. And what we're seeing right now very clearly is that there's one message, well, there's at least one, there's at least two messages about what that socializing message is, how we're supposed to be as Americans. Okay, and then above that, is it on the list? Yes, this one actually is on the list, is you have religion. And even if, and this is a quiz question, even if you are not religious, right, you do not claim a religious identity, religion is still influencing all of these different agents, right? There's still this religious, subtle religious tone, right? When we say that when we say even things like we're all in this together, there's this religious connection, right? Even to all of those subtleties. And then some of the other things on the list that I haven't talked about that are not part of my circle is we know that daycare kids that go to daycare, that they learn different social skills at a different rate. They usually talk sooner, they have a bigger vocabulary, but they have a different bond with their parents, with their mother, I think is all the research. Think about what you learn from your peers, from your friends, right? Next chapter, we'll talk about one theory that says how your peers, how we gravitate or how our behavior changes according to what group we're in. Were you competitive? Did you do sports in school? What did you learn about yourself, about other people, about the other team when you were in sports? What it meant to be a good athlete, or what the consequences of not being a good athlete? Because remember, it's not just about what you're learning about what is, it's also about what isn't, what it means not to be an athlete. Work, right? This is another fun one, is that they're different. If you've ever been in a job where you just really fit in, right? As opposed to a job where like, oh, you just didn't, maybe it was because different places of work have different values. Sometimes it's explicit in our mission statement, right? But workplaces have their own culture. And when you go through an orientation, that is that socializing. I remember my orientation here when it was being explained to me how we dress, right? That this is our dress code. And even, oh, I worked at Disney World and we even were socialized how you wear your hair and what earrings you can wear. And then ultimately media, right? And we can't forget media. Media is incredibly powerful these days as agents of socialization. And this has gone longer than I intended. So I'm going to stop here. And the next one we'll talk about, the next one we'll talk about more socialization concepts.